Welcome to the wonderful world of looking for answers. As humans, we've always been curious about finding answers to the things we have questions about. And interestingly, in what might seem a bit of an anachronism these days, it used to be that we asked each other. That's right, other humans, for the answers to the questions we had. And this was the way. For almost 200,000 years that humans, well as we would recognize them anyway, have been around. For 6,000 generations, your ancestors looked to each other for finding the answers to the mysteries of life. And then, about 5,000 years ago, we began to find another way to optimize the access to answers, to optimize our ability to learn, to optimize our content. We built the libraries. Now, the earliest of the libraries were archives of the information. They were the keepers of the stories, the commercial transactions, the inventories. Now, when humans wanted to know the answer to something, well, there was an archive, an organized way of keeping the information, and the keeper of that was the librarian, the revered keeper of information. The great library of Alexandria in Egypt was notable for its famous librarians. One of them, Callimachus, was one of the most renowned Greek poets and scholars. But it wasn't his storytelling, even though his style and influence was uniquely valuable in the heritage of Greek poetry, that would make Callimachus truly noteworthy. As one of the librarians of the Great Library of Alexandria, Callimachus introduced what would be the first topical catalog of the library's holdings. Each of these pinnacs, as they were called, were organized by 10 subject classes into scrolls, and each contained bibliographical and condensed information about the information, and a reference, of course, to its location in the library. What Callimachus created was nothing short of remarkable. He basically indexed the entire worldwide collection of information in the Great Library of Alexandria. Callimachus, well, he ostensibly built the first Google of the world. Welcome to episode 6 of Marketing Makers, the series for those who make marketing work. I'm Robert Rose, and I'm your host. Whether you're an independent consultant, a director at a Fortune 100, a newly appointed CMO, we are all marketing makers. And this month, we're talking about the process of making our content more contextual, findable, and, well, the perfect answer. In a word, optimized. The balance of how we put people, processes, and technology together to make sure we're not just providing answers, but actually teaching something. Welcome to Marketing Makers. See, Homer, complete works, HA2465, that's okay, 2465, and then Homer, Iliad, HA2466, oh, hi! Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Marketing Makers Lab. It's here we explore in depth the background behind some of marketing's historical concepts and how they've evolved today into some of the most modern of approaches. And today, well, as you can see, I've gone back in time. I had these old cards from a card catalog from my college library. Don't know what those are? Well, I can show you what they look like. Yeah, if you can believe it, this is how we used to find the books we were looking for doing that research report. Card by card, you'd find the book, and then you'd go search for it in the library. And if you were smart, you'd find a couple of options because it was likely that there were 5 other people working on that research topic, and so that book, that one that you were looking for, probably already checked out. So what would you do? Well, nothing. There was nothing you could do. But I'm not bitter about it or anything. Libraries were not only the way that we organized our information, they were also the source of our answers. About 6 years ago, the New York Public Library posted many of the questions their librarians received from the 1940s to the 1980s. And that included things like, I went to a New Year's Eve party, but I don't know the hosts. Should I send a thank you note? Or how about this one? What was the name of Napoleon's horse? Or how about this one? How do I put up wallpaper? To my absolute favorite, which seems to come on the exact day of my birth, does the New York Public Library have a computer for the use of the public? The answer? No, sir. Just hold on a second. I'm on my way. I'm right there. It's June of 1966. I'm coming, I promise. And that brings us to today. Today, if we want to ask someone for an answer, we can simply type it into an interface and wait. Our social media friends from all around the world will answer our questions. And yeah, just like the old days, you should probably be aware of just who is answering it. And instead of the librarian, well, we now have the world's information at our fingertips with search engines. But if we're the one whose answer we want to be found, how do we optimize our answer to the top of that huge pile? But maybe even more importantly, how do we provide context for the consumer, the asker of that question? The biggest challenge today is that technology has advanced to a point that the machine can find the answer in the library and extract it directly from the context that might help the asker learn more deeply. In the past, if you went to the library to look up a topic like how do you put up wallpaper, for example, well, you'd have to at least skim the rest of the book about the difficulty of actually doing it, and you might go, this is not something I really want to tackle. Today, you can get the step-by-step answer with a simple search, and you may not discover until it's too late. I'm not speaking from personal experience here or anything, with no opportunity to deepen your knowledge just how difficult that particular thing might be. Anyway, you search for a date, and you hope that this amazing new lakeside resort hotel in the mountains is still open. The answer dutifully comes back in your search engine, yes, that date is open. But you fail to get the context that the reason that it's open is because it's the last week before it closes down for 6 months to be fumigated for pests. The answer is, how do you do that? We optimize our content. And this isn't new. We've been wanting to optimize our content going all the way back to Callimachus and his challenge of creating the ultimate reference for the Library of Alexandria. Or honestly, optimizing content goes back even prehistoric days when Og and Grok were both teaching the lessons of the hunt in their cave paintings. But everybody went to Og's cave. Why? They both told the same story. Well, it's because Og's painting, they were just so much more detailed and engaging. It was more fun to go to Og's wall as opposed to Grok's. So let's give Og a like and start looking for new answers. Access to information today, it's not just search, because today's search engines, well, they're not really search engines. They're probably described better as optimized answer engines, and they are becoming increasingly challenging as the answer is not necessarily the right one, but the one that's been optimized to come to the top of the pile of the answers you're seeing. So yes, when we're looking to answers, we still go to Google. And in fact, Google commands 62% of the share of web searches today. But we're increasingly starting to look for answers elsewhere. Research shows, for example, we're looking at specific products. And if we're looking for specific products, we're much more likely to start with an Amazon search these days than a Google search. If we're looking for images, where do we go? Google Images. If we're looking for video, well, we're going to go to YouTube. Or while Google still commands the largest share of our search for directions somewhere, Apple started recently eating into that market share for searching for directions, a map to a place. Or if we're looking for what people have actually said about the products or services we're searching for, we see Facebook has actually surpassed more than 2 billion searches per day, putting it ahead of Microsoft Bing. Or if we're searching for a travel destination, it's an estimated 1 in 10 internet users start that journey with what? TripAdvisor. And there are more and more than 40 million searches on LinkedIn for job searches every single week. All of this, all of these searches on these all search engines begs the question of how are we as marketers thinking about optimizing our content for all of these questions? Now, if we go back to the early days of digital, we can see that optimizing our content to be found on search engines goes even further back than when Larry and Sergey decided to misspell the name for the largest number in the world, and they figured that it would make a good name for a company. And in fact, according to Jason Gambert, the author of the book Net Results, well, we can thank the manager of the band Jefferson Starship for starting out this wonderful idea of SEO in 1995. Yeah, the managers of the makers of classics like Jane and We Built This City on Rock and Roll was decidedly annoyed that a search for the band on search engines was returning the band's webpage on page 4. Can you imagine that? Well, how did they solve this? Well, funnily enough, in the old days, optimizing your website content, it was as simple as having the search keywords be mentioned a lot more frequently. So the company that designed the band's website hadn't thought to mention the band's name that often since, you were on their website, you probably knew who you were looking at. So once they added the band's name a lot more times in tiny black print against a black background, the site vaulted to number 1. Now, of course, this little optimization trick not only doesn't work anymore, it might be considered a black hat kind of trick that the search engines will actually penalize you for. But this was the birth of trying to optimize our content to be discoverable, to be found. And we've spent a good part of the last 25 years since trying to figure out just how to do this with our websites and our content. And it's certainly a lot more complicated these days. As we just talked about, it's no longer just about optimizing against search engines. We have to optimize against social channels, vertical channels, industry channels, and yes, even our own owned media channels. Yeah, that's right. Because even if we can get somebody to our answers, well, we have to be able to engage them beyond just answering the question. We have to also have the ability to put the right context around that answer. So how do we do that? Well, the short answer, of course, is to create awesome content. I mean, isn't that the answer to everything? But we should also remember our overall goal here is not to attract the most people all of the time to answer all questions and our information. Rather, our goal is to attract the right people at their optimal time to answer the intended question with the best contextual answers. Right, optimal, intention, best, context. Those are the keywords we want to think about. Let me ask you a question. How do you craft engaging and SEO-friendly content from scratch? Our sponsor, Semrush, has identified 12 key steps you can take to optimize your copy for users and search engines. They've created a guide to map out the entire process, from keyword search to copy optimization to a content audit. If you're looking to create better content marketing experiences for your users and outrank your rivals, you're going to want to get this free guide. Optimize your content for SEO and improve its quality on the go with SEO Writing Assistant by Semrush. Try it for free today at semrush.com/SWA. That URL again is semrush.com/SWA. And it leads us to a framework that I've developed that helps us think through the content optimization attributes we might want to think about as part of an overall marketing strategy. So it starts where I believe all content should begin, which is optimizing for the human, our audience. And the first thing is to start with intent. Now, of course, the key with intent is understanding our audience and what they're really looking for when they consume our content. The North Star of this is, quite frankly, understanding our humans, our audience's intent, better than they might even understand it. When the question is, how much does Y product cost? We should ideally know whether or not the best answer is an article talking through the various attributes that affect the cost of a product, or quite simply, a price list, or both. And without technology, tricks, or data, the goal should be to understand all of the intentions of our audience and make it easy for them to actually find those things. This is truly what is at the heart of a great search engine optimization strategy. It's not just creating content that will rank for a particular search word. If you think about the Jefferson Airplane example, that's exactly what they did. Basically, whatever hack keyword strategy they could come up with to help them rank was what was going to get them to the front page. But who knows what happens when they got there? Today, understanding how the keyword or key phrase matches the intent for the searcher, that's what will take researchers and searchers to something that matches the intention of their search. And that brings us to the second optimization question, which is authority. Now, remember our librarian that we talked about and all those questions they were being asked to answer? Think about that for a moment. What were the callers expecting? They called a library and asked, should I write a thank you note after I attend a New Year's Eve party? Who did they think was answering that question? A librarian, of course, but it could have been very easily a librarian like me who, well, let's just say, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is. But the librarian doesn't say that. They are the keepers of information, and so they might look it up or they might make it up. Something that has to have some authority. So when we develop our content, no matter if we're educating, inspiring, entertaining, or simply providing directions, authority matters. This means details matter, depth matters. Surface level content that never provides access to details will fare less well than those that basically provide and claim and attain authoritative status. Now, the key here is not just one piece of content, but it's your entire corpus of content and how it relates to one another. So how are you linking, attaching, serving relevant details to more in-depth content to everything you post so that it's easy to get that authoritative answer and that the consumer need not go anywhere else to get it? That leads us to what I call internal context. In a word, meaning. What does this stuff mean? Now, this might be your point of view on the world. It might be providing the unique take or approach to solving a particular problem. It might be the information you choose to provide in proximity to each other. Having a clear, consistent, and differentiated point of view and or meaning to your content is what can provide the ability for it to stand out when people are searching for those answers. Making decisions of how to display that meaning, that context, can also help you create deeper engagement with anyone who does answer it. This is a familiar concept to me. It's what I call the settle the bar bet problem. When you simply answer a question, someone at a bar says, "What's the answer to that question?" And then they pull out their mobile phone and they search and they find your answer and they go, yeah, that's it. And then they stick it in their pocket. Basically, they found what they needed and they move on. You want them to get the answer, but also be so intrigued that they ask their friend for a moment as they also start reading aloud. Did you know that? Did you know that this? Did you know that this is? Maybe they even bookmark it for future reading because it has engaged them with the context, the meaning, the deeper meaning of the way that you answered that question. Then we can cross the threshold into optimizing not for the human, but for the machine. Our digital librarian, if you will, our cyber Callimachus. We start with external context. This is where we want to create technology and automated solutions to optimize our content for conditional contexts. For example, how are we presenting our content, our answers, in a mobile versus desktop environment? Perhaps, and this is truly a plea from a consumer, maybe we'll decide that pop-ups won't be in the mobile version of our site. Please, please let that happen. That's just a really big wish of mine. Anyway, asking ourselves how we're using location, buying history, content consumption, device type, first-party data that we're gathering to provide different contextual displays of our content. That goes into that external context. And this goes beyond just the technological aspects, but using this insight, we can glean from the technology. We can help manually decide the kind of content to put into other channels like social media or those vertical sites or other interfaces where we don't control how that content will be displayed. And that brings us to the next one, which I think I describe as described. This is where we become our own librarians and we start creating content that describes our content to help the machines categorize, measure, personalize, activate, measure the content for that optimal presentation. Easy way to think about this is in 3 very commonly used categories. Descriptive metadata. That's a fancy way to say basically we're creating content that simply describes our content against categories, terms that can help our business strategy understand where it is better. Items here might be the audience persona that you create your content for, the buyer's journey phase that this particular piece of content is for, the category of products it supports, even the author of the content. Anything we want to think about that describes the content in terms of categories we'd like to track, look at, see, and basically measure. Then there's administrative metadata. Now, this is not something that's really related to the consumption of content, but how the content is managed. Things like publish date, or maybe even more importantly, expiration date for rights management of that image that you no longer will have the right to use anymore. Legal or compliance categorization, anything that helps the administration of that content be easier. And then there's finally what we call structural metadata. This is where the relationships of that content might be connected to each other. This is what helps one piece of content relate to another, a bridge, if you will. This might be a set of data that relates to one piece of content to another piece of content. And so if you have if you like this, you might like that kind of association. Or it might even be how to relate content pieces to another format. For example, you might have a piece of content from a book, let's say. But when it gets displayed digitally in a web browser, it's out of context, obviously, from the book. So you might assign it structural metadata such as page number or chapter number, that sort of thing. So it becomes easier for the consumer to relate it, the print versus the digital version of that particular book. Basically, the descriptions of content can be more content than the content itself. In some instances, when we were doing metadata strategies for some businesses, we would have 3 times as much descriptive meta content as the content itself. And then finally, that brings us to the purely technical attributes of content optimization, and which we call, well, funnily enough, the technical. Here we want to optimize content for the technologies that will help it get it in front of our audiences. We want to optimize our websites to be fast so that they're responsive to search engines. We want to optimize our mobile technology so that they're responsive to different interfaces that may come up from different kinds of devices. We want to block our content out into atomic structures to use CMS technologies to templatize these blocks of content, such as a standard brand language or product descriptions or legal footers or other things so that they're reusable and automated so that only needs to be updated in one place. We want to use that metadata to be always present, always in the next best presentation of content to a consumer. And there are others, of course. This basically scratches the surface. But hopefully, as you can see, this model can start to help you organize your thoughts as you start thinking through your content strategy and how you optimize your content to be always delivering the best experience. And if it seems, well, overwhelming, just start with optimizing for humans first. And just think of it like this. If we understand our audiences and what they're really looking for, we can optimize our content for findability. And once they find us, if we can create in-depth, valuable, informative, engaging content with authority, we can truly bring out the meaning of our content and drive better internal context. And then we can start using that basis to start using technology to optimize for external conditional contexts, such as mobile, search, social, etc. And then we can start taking care to describe our content so that machines can understand what we want those machines to do with it. And we can use technical solutions to present that content in the most optimal, next best fashion. Put very simply, today, we are Callimachus. We are not only the poets, we are not only the storytellers, but we are the librarians. We are here to provide the best stories, but also optimize how easily they are to be found and consumed by the right person in their time. Well, that's the future of content and content optimization. That's what it looks like. It looks exactly like what Callimachus found in the Library of Alexandria. We can create amazing stories and be the poets of our century. But if we don't make it easy to find, consume, and value, it won't matter. We have to organize and optimize our content, our answers to all those questions our audience might have. Organizing and optimizing is the act of building our content creator superpower, so that when our content must lift the weight of the entire business, we never get tired. Until I see you next month, remember, it's your story to tell. Tell it well.